Ok, el doctor Añuz Mubayi, él recibió su bachillerato en física y matemática de la Universidad Macar de la India. Hizo también su maestría en el Departamento de Matemáticas, en Matemática Pura, en el Instituto Indio de Tecnología de Kanpur, India, y recibió su doctorado en Matemática Aplicada en la vida y en las ciencias de la vida y social de la Universidad de Arizona State University. El doctor Mubayi es un experto en matemática aplicada y computacional, y también él está ejerciendo unos cargos muy importantes dentro de lo que es la matemática aplicada en Arizona State University, siendo codirector del MTBI, que es el Instituto de Biología Teórica Matemática, instituto al cual yo también he visitado algunas veces, en el cual se forma a jóvenes desde lo que terminan su pregrado para involucrarlos dentro de la investigación en biomatemática. Asimismo, también tiene otras afiliaciones dentro de la misma universidad en los institutos o en las facultades donde se aplica el modelamiento matemático. Bien, es un placer entonces para mí presentar a mi colega y amigo en esta oportunidad que nos ofrece la dinámica del COVID en sitios de muy cercano contacto, determinantes sociales y controles también sociales. Añuz Mubayi, it's a pleasure to have you in SEMBIOMAT. Please, you can begin.
Well, thank you very much, Roxana. It's pleasure and honor to be part of this year's SEMBIOMAT. I've heard a lot, and I've been actually following you very much, and we know each other for quite a long time. So let me actually talk about a little bit briefly my title, and then we go about it, explaining some of my background. And my apologies in advance that I know only poquito español. So so I'll be talking in English. So today I will be talking about close contact places. Close contact places are very critical, especially for the COVID. And I will be talking about some of the work that we have been doing in the close contact places. And as Roxana was mentioning, I'm affiliated with Arizona State University, Illinois State University, and Precision Hair. Okay, so let's see how I can change. So I'll go quickly into some of the memories, actually. So these are some past pictures, and Roxana, if you remember, these were shared by you, and I kind of collected it from somewhere. So I know Professor Lopez Cruz from long time, and we were actually at the same time in the graduate school, and I had lots of interaction with her. We used to have a lot of parties in Arizona. And I'm sure that you miss here and we miss you there a lot. But at the same time, also really what I've seen is what amazing things you have been doing in Peru. So congratulations on that. I mean, this is how you are encouraging people from your country and Latin America as a whole, as well as giving them a platform to see how other people in other parts of the world are doing research. So it's amazing. Congratulations, Roxana, on the efforts that you have put together. It's not easy. Second thing, I want to also acknowledge Cesar Monaco. He's my collaborators. He's also in Peru. And we have been working on various vector-borne diseases like dengue, actually, for example. So these are the two aspects that I wanted to link to Peru that I have been in touch with. So, okay, so let's go further. I mean, today I will be talking about COVID. It is very different. My talk will be a little different than the rest of the talk that I've been seeing at the conference. My talk is more on practical issues that have been challenging for from the modeling perspective to address. So it's not new. COVID epidemic is not new. I mean, although this it is came at a time when all of a sudden and with a short span of time, but there has been an epidemic of this similar type, if not exactly the same, for many years, many centuries, I would say. And you can see in this chart, what I have here is, if you can see my cursor, on the right side is the dates that is observed in this chart, and the left hand side is the name of the disease and the number of deaths that are occurring. So for example, this green one is the Spanish flu, 1918, very famous 1918 Spanish flu, which had 40 to 50 million people reported deaths. There could be some more also. HIV AIDS have also been caused many deaths in the past few decades since 1980s. But if you see in the last 2 decades, since 2000, there has been some outbreak, and coronavirus has been on the same size, if not less. So for example, swine flu, there has been Ebola, there has been MERS. And due to various reasons, this have not become like a huge outbreak. And even Asian flus, Hong Kong flu, that were considered of the size of 1 million people died in that. So this is nothing new. We knew these things were supposed to come, but we didn't know exactly when this will come. So we were aware of this thing. So that just wanted to make ourselves familiar with it. Also, since I will be talking about coronavirus and close contact places, and it's very important to see what we have learned from the past outbreak. For example, in 1918 Spanish flu, these kids used to wear these in their neck. They wear camphor bags. You see these bags they are wearing, the kids. These are called camphor bags. And basically it leads to major reduction in the number of cases in the closed places, in the rooms, in the halls. And the reasons were not really that it has to do something with the virus, but it has a bad smell. And so people were not coming close to each other. So it was acting as a separator between the people, and therefore they were kind of how they were managing the close contacts within these close contact places, confined places. So they have a different variety of things they were doing as an interventions to control these things, and it have been in the 1918 Spanish flu, for example. These army barracks were divided with these things in a big halls. And that was the way they were trying to reduce the number of contact. It's some kind of cubicles for these army, this thing. And so these were the interventions were very common, and we are kind of carrying forward those interventions right now, also some of those ones. What exactly I mean by close contact places or close contact events? So let's talk about some of the incidents that has happened in this coronavirus. You may be heard about some of them and may or may not be. For example, one of the reasons why this COVID outbreak spread throughout the world was this conference that happened in Singapore. That was considered as one of the major conference that led to the spread of an outbreak outside the Asian region. And this company was hosted by a gas company in Singapore, and it was in January 20 to 23rd, attended by 109 delegates. One of them were from the Wuhan city who was infected. And due to that, there were 7 infected people, 7 infection occurred within conference. And that 7 attendees went on internationally to spread the disease. So that was, the conference was considered as a close contact places or confined places. So that is one of the examples, and very significant one, which led to the global outbreak, which we call it as a pandemic in some sort. South Korea. In fact, South Korea outbreak started literally from a church, and there was a woman who attended the church meeting on Sunday and infected most of the 70 individuals that participated in it. It was just 4 hours church ceremony, and it led to a major outbreak. And around 60 people got infected around that thing. And that led to an outbreak in South Korea. That church events led to an outbreak. So that was a close contact event that led to a major events outside this thing. So this is very, very commonly seen in COVID outbreak now. In Chicago, for example, there was a one birthday party that led to an outbreak in Chicago as a city, metropolitan area. There was in 3 hours birthday party, 7 cases were infected, and that led to an outbreak in the Chicago city. In Washington, there was a choir practice, and there was one infected person in choir practice who actually infected 53 people. There were 61 people present in that choir. So these are all an examples of close contact events that led to a major outbreak. So how do you understand these processes? And in the COVID, it is different in COVID as compared to the previous outbreaks of different diseases, basically, in that regard. One of the major things that has observed in the US is the nursing homes. Around 80% deaths have been age of 65 and older, and nursing has been badly hit, very badly hit. And there has been many reasons for that badly hit. It could be long-term care facilities. They don't have a good protective gears for the residents or for the. By the way, these nursing homes are for age, for many of these nursing homes for senior citizens who are living there, and they are vulnerable population, especially because they have a pre-health conditions, and they lived in a confined places. Those nursing homes are a close contact places, for example. In fact, the Trump administration has recently formed a Corona Commission on Safety and Quality in Nursing Home, and they recommended few things to improve upon it, but it has led to around about 70,000 cases out of roughly 190,000 cases as of today. So this is a rough numbers, but that's a huge, almost we are talking about around 40% of the US cases are coming from there. So it is really amazing how many, and how do we understand as a mathematicians, as a mathematical modelers, how do we understand these close contact places? It was my interest, and we have been working on it. Another interesting aspect, we have seen it in the cruises. You all might have heard about it, that spread to, cruise was one of the spreader around the world. One of the cruise was Ruby Princess, which had 1,500 passengers roughly upon, and that were allowed. There was infected people on that board, and they were allowed to board in Sydney. And that was the reason why an outbreak in Australia, there was no cases before that, and Australia bombarded with cases because of this Ruby Princess. And not only that Australia got cases, but some of the passenger flew from Sydney to Florida, and it started an outbreak in Florida also. So this was one of the reasons why an outbreak is started in Florida, for example, in US, all the way on the opposite side of the world, that this caused the infection. There were other ships also, cruise ships, there were the cases, but they were not places where it spread. For example, Diamond Princess, it was docked at Japanese pier for a long period of time. They didn't allow people to come out of the ships through the Diamond Princess. So, and then there was Zaandam, which also actually traveled across many South American countries, waiting to, there were no country was allowing the ship to dock. And therefore, okay, so there was, yeah. So, so this was, but Ruby Princess was the one which was critical in that regard. It actually started an outbreak. 170 people from this Ruby Princess were flown to US. And there were 5 of them died actually also. Actually not, 8 were died. 20 died in Australia, 8 died in US. But there were many cases that recovered also. And the whole idea was, how do you handle these close contact? When do you stop boarding, for example, what policy you do that thing. So I'm giving these examples that are practically very important examples, and we don't know how to handle it. And mathematicians can understand these things from a modeling perspective very well. Okay. Another beautiful examples of fact is social distancing in a restaurant. Well, there were one infected person in China that on January 24th that participated in this in a lunch event with the family in a restaurant, and this restaurant was very popular in China, and in South China city of Guozhou. And this person, which is A1 here, A1 is the one, resulted in, during a lunchtime only, resulted in almost 9 additional cases that went on to spread other cases in the China, for example. And there were 91 person in this restaurant, 83 customer, 8 staff that were interacting, but only 3 family got infected. Members of the 3 family, they were sitting in A, B, C table. These are tables, dining tables, and these circles are the people's, the family people that are sitting in the table. A, B, C are the 3 families. There were E and F family that were not got infected. So one of the thing was, there are other things that are very critical in the close contact places. It's the airflow. And the reason ABC got infected because there was an air condition on the one side of it which was flowing the air on one directions, and that led to the many infection to that. And this is a major event that is depicted in the literature, which led to the major outbreak. So well, why the coronavirus has been so successful in doing that? What has been the reason for it? I mean, as compared to other pandemic or diseases outbreaks in the past, one of the reason is global connection and interaction and urbanization. Even though reproduction number, which is average number of cases the person is infecting, is around 2.5, is in the, if it in the middle, roughly in the middle, there's one person is infecting around 2.5 in COVID, whereas other diseases are having much higher. For example, measles are 16, but they are not spread very quickly as compared to COVID, for example, that is spread very quickly. One of the reason also is that it infects upper and lower respiratory system, unlike other respiratory diseases. Usually, these diseases which are respiratory viruses, they infect either the upper or the lower, not both, but coronavirus does the both. Not only that, 10 to 20% of the cases are responsible for 80% of the transmission events that are happening there. So it is these aspects make it very easy to spread, even though one person is infecting roughly around 2.5 individuals. So this is some of the major things. Also, many of the cases that infect are asymptomatic. They don't show the symptoms, and when they show the symptoms, they don't infect. Basically, their pathogen load comes low. They become lower. So from the modeling end, when we talk about these close contact places or anything, for example, from a COVID end, many of you might be working on COVID. What has been the up-to-date information? I mean, one thing we have seen that mathematical models have become very popular in this COVID. So in one sense, even though we have a lot of consequences of the COVID, but one good thing that has happened is that it has led to mathematical models being popular now. Many studies are coming on the modeling, rapid publications are going on. Well, common people are not talking about exponential growth. Common people are talking about flattening the curve. These are mathematical terminologies that are now becoming so common. Reproduction number, herd immunity, how do you calculate? These things have become a common languages. And even modelers themselves have changed in this outbreaks. And that is a point to be noted here. Sometimes we sit in our lab, we don't know what is going on globally, but the modelers themselves are engaging. For example, now I have started to post more on the Twitter, for example. So I'm engaging my research or my work more on the social media, for example. So things have changed quite drastically with this COVID outbreak. In that sense, it is a good outbreak for mathematical modelers. But of course, there are lots of consequences and a lot of stress, a lot of pain, sufferings that it has brought to all of us as a community. So one of the questions that comes to our mind is, which model is better? How do you choose the models? I mean, so initially there was Neil Ferguson's group models at Imperial College. They were the first one to come out with these models, and they use stochastic individual based models. Their model was okay, but it didn't predicted correct trends. If you see this right hand side, that is showing some of the top models that are tracking the COVID world over. And none of them are tracking well. None of them are tracking well. And the reason is the model's goals have not been truly a projections. They are answering a specific questions. And that is very difficult for a common public to understand, that the role of modeling is not only for it's actually less as a projection than more of understanding the local questions that in hand. And so Neil Ferguson, what he did is, if you do not do a policy right now, how many cases, what will be the peak of an outbreak? How many deaths will occur? That is what he was saying, that how you can reduce the death by half, what policy you do it. And that for that reason, it was very good, although the projection was not very, very, very good. Sunitra Gupta, on the other hand, was another Oxford model that was used. It was a deterministic SIR model. And it said that the 1 month before the first reported death, the outbreak was started. How did this 1 month come? Is by the estimation of that model. So so basically the model itself was, model itself was not very good individually, but taken together was very helpful in understanding many aspects of the outbreak. When there is an outbreak, there is a basic question that comes to the mind, is how contagious is the pathogen? So now, I think many of you are mathematicians and might find it, oh, this is very trivial. Well, when you come with the data, when you work with the data, there's lots of challenges. And these things, even though it sounds very simple, but when you truly work on it, it gives you quite a challenging task. So two things, that basic questions that when an outbreak comes, people ask is, how contagious is a pathogen and how virulent is the disease? So contagious is measured by reproduction number, and virulent is measured by a case fatality ratio. So for example, this is showing, let me see if I can, sorry, I am having these issues with my Okay, so, the measles, for example, has a higher reproduction number and high case fatality ratio, but it has not become a pandemic, whereas COVID has become a pandemic, although these two numbers are lower. There are other aspects why this is becoming pandemic. So, well, I was coming back to my point of close contact places like nursing home, long-term care facilities like cruises. How do we understand it? And well, let's understand something very basic here. Reproduction numbers is now become a common word, which is basically how many one person is infecting. Suppose the community, we are modeling a community and a long-term care facility in that community. And one person in community is spread, the reproduction number for community to community is 0.8. These tables shows the reproduction numbers. And the one from community to long-term care facility, a person from infected in community to the long-term is 0.2. And say these are all parts of the reproduction numbers, and they are all less than 1. That means none of these components can by themselves start an outbreak. We need to have one person replacing other in order for an outbreak to occur. So that means it has to be bigger than 1. But none of these 4 numbers are bigger than 1. But actually, for a whole community with one long-term care, the reproduction number is 1.1. Which is kind of a somehow taken together these four parts of this table. So let's see how we get a reproduction number 1.1, which is, it's very easy concepts to work in a formula, but exactly see how these things go together and compute these things is important here. So suppose you have infected cases, there are 100 of them in long-term care facility and there are 1,000 of them in a community. In the community means in the population where the long-term care facility is. And based on this table, there is 0.7 from long-term care facility to long-term care facility cases. So this is a reproduction number is 0.7. So this will generate 70 cases. And this long-term care facility to community is 0.2. This thing 0.2. So it will generate 20 people among hundreds, 20 infection, secondary cases. Same way from community, if there are 1,000 people there in the community, it is 0.8. So the 800 people, 0.8 times 1,000 will generate 800 new cases, and 0.4 times 1,000 will generate 400 people in long-term care facility. So secondary cases will be that many that will be generated. And if you add them together, in community, there will be 820. In long-term care facility, there will be total of 470 if you add them together. So the total new cases will be 1,290 here. And initially, you have 1,100 cases by adding 100 times plus 1,000. So, and if you divide that ratio, you will get a reproduction number of 1.1. So what we have learned here is even though the reproduction number of the subpopulations are lower than 1, but you can still have an outbreak in that community as a whole, because the way the reproduction number is computed is like a weighted in some sense over the subpopulation. So very important aspects that sometimes we ignore when we use these formulas, and it's very important. Now, also, it's very difficult nowadays. We talk about reproduction number of the community, but what about reproduction number of healthcare settings, like in a hospital? The question comes, what is the meaning of reproduction number in the healthcare settings? I'm talking about close contact traces, so I need to define these metrics before one could use these ones truly in this aspect. So for example, the reproduction number is defined as the probability of transmission per minute is spent in single contact, P, times the total number of average contacts that is happening in minutes, and NC is the average number of contacts per person per day. How many contacts that are happening? So N is the total contacts that are happening. D is the duration of the contact, one single contact. And D is an infectious period. D inf is an infectious period of a person, how long a person remains there. So it's actually a product of these quantity that forms the reproduction number, truly speaking. However, if you want to compute for the community, these red text, the average duration, average contacts will change. It will not be same as the community, because in the healthcare settings, the contacts are happening more frequent and more closer. So you need to define it in a right way. So if I use the same formula for the community and healthcare, the only thing will be different will be H and C, these two parameters, which is average durations and a number of contacts. And if you try to relate this formula, this would be the relationship between the two formula. H stands for hospital or healthcare settings, and C stands for community. Okay, so what it is saying is that using this formula is telling you, this formula is telling you that you can compute the reproduction number of any healthcare facility if you know the community reproduction number and if you know the average contacts in that facility. Now, the community reproduction number is estimated by the modelers easily. So, well, for an example, there was a contact data in a community. You can compute like 8 contacts are happening. I've used this paper from 2015, which compute the average number of contacts at 8 contacts per day, and the duration was 30 minutes roughly. And reproduction number for COVID is around 2 to 3. So I'm taking 3 here. So from this formula, you can substitute here, substitute these things in the community formula, and you can compute P. What is the P here? Okay. And so once you get the P, you can substitute that P in this one, and you can compute for a hospital setting. So I've taken an example of 170 bed hospital, where the contacts were measured by some way, and the duration was measured as 34 minutes. And so you can compute the reproduction number of the hospital, and it turns out to be 7.65, which is much higher than reproduction number of 3 of the COVID in the community. So you see the reproduction number in healthcare setting is much harder. Now, note one thing. If you use the mask and other protective gears, then this might be lowered. But right now, for the basic calculations, there is no need for, the simple calculation is showing that a reproduction number in a close contact places could be higher, like nursing homes and long-term care facilities. There is also an important aspect which is called K number. Reproduction number of the 2 disease could be same, but K number captures the how variance, how diverse is reproduction number is 1 numbers, and that cannot be taken for a disease, because some people might be infecting many more. Then, for example, COVID has reproduction number 2.5. That doesn't mean all of them are infecting as 2.5. Some are infecting more. So that dispersion, how wide is the distribution of reproduction number, is captured by K number. It's called as dispersion. It's a very important parameter. For example, in 1918 flu, the K is 1. That means 40% of infected people did not pass the infection. Whereas the K number for COVID is around 0.1. Around 70% of the people are not infecting anyone. So that variation is very important here, and that K number is very important. And actually the way we use it to calculate it is by using a branching process. And branching process, we give a distribution of number of next generation cases. And that next generation is coming from a distribution which has this parameter, dispersion parameter, which is K, variance, basically variance of that of offspring distribution is a K number. Very important metric that we use for the close contact places. Well, I also want to draw some aspects to what is mathematical modeling. I mean, there are different types of mathematical modelers. You might find, so I'm giving lots of examples, lots of empirical studies to show what aspects is critical. I'm spending lots of time in empirical informations. And when I do my research work, I divide my work into these type of percentages. For example, I spend 30% of my time in identifying or reading the biology or reading the empirical information, 10% in incorporating in the modeling aspects, and only 20% in doing the truly a mathematical analysis. And then a lot of time in explaining the results. How do you explain the mathematical results? So, you know, but there are different other people, the other modelers, they spend a lot of time in mathematical analysis. Again, there are different types of modelers. But my most effort is going in mechanisms and here in presentation of the results. And therefore, I'm giving lots of examples where it will be highly motivated, and it's very different. I mean, you can't just use one size fit all for cruises versus nursing home versus airplanes. These are different close contact places. So you need to understand the differences, truly great differences in that. When you model these close contact places, one of the important things comes to the light is how do you measure these contacts? Well, what does the contact means? Is the touching is the contact, or standing in 6 feet is a contact? Contacts vary from an age, whether it is happening daily, whether it is happening weekly, whether it is 3 times touching is a contact, whether handshake is a contact, 5 minutes duration is a contact. So there is lots of ways you can define it. So which one, I mean, as a mathematician, we take it as a parameter and then work with the analysis. But truly, what is the beneficial of those things? When you talk about truly what does that mean actually, then you realize it is not that easy. And different from a modeling perspective, there is different assumptions that goes into that. For example, how is the population mixing? It is mixing based on the size of the population itself, or they are mixing, like some age groups are more preferred mixing than others, for example. So there is a preference of any sort, or it is empirically driven information that we are putting it in our contacts, basically. So there's different ways you can do measurements of it. It's not one way. I mean, it's very easy to take a number from the literature and put it in a mathematical model and simulate it. But truly, what does that mean is very important aspects. And some people spend their whole life in measuring the contacts because it's so complex to talk about contact. I mean, it is usually calculated using diary, some sort of diary given to a person, and it is asked every frequent intervals. It is asked what is the type of contact you have, what is the duration that you have, where is the location, what frequency you had. Every day they have to fill up this diary every day, and you have to ask many people in order to measure these things. There is a lot of challenges also, like for example, as I was saying, how do you define a distance of a contact, for example? What is it 6 feet is a distance, or it is contact, or it is 10 feet is a contact? Also, the duration is quite relevant quantity. Location, it might vary from one location to another. So these variations, how do you capture in your model, is always a tricky task. And when you start to see the data, then you start to truly develop a novel models. Otherwise, we are doing the similar type of model again and again and again. So that's the understanding of the real data is very important. So just to give you an idea how these things goes in the picture, for example, the simple model here is capturing one parameter as C. Basically, it is assuming C is the average contact for everyone in the population, the same number of contacts a person is doing. The C represent that, basically. And rho is basically a probability of transmission given a single contact. Now, this is a simple SIR model, but if you make the contacts heterogeneous, that means you assume susceptibles are making CS contacts, infected people are making CI contacts, and in recovered are making CR contacts. Then this model will change now. So this quantity now become the contacts, average contacts of each one of the susceptibles. But this probability of finding an infected person will now change because they are mixing in a different way. So then this should be weighted by the average number of contacts of each of the population. And that's how the ratio should be computed, truly speaking. Anyway, so let's go further. Long-term care facility has been a major problems in Washington state, in US, led to actually in US it is said that major outbreak started from the Washington state, from the nursing homes and long-term care facility in Washington, and that led to an outbreak as a whole. So we started working on this paper with my collaborator as Dr. Aditi Ghosh and Padmanabhan Shishir from, Aditi Ghosh is from Wisconsin, Whitewater, and Dr. Padmanabhan Shishir is from George Mason University. And we wanted to study the nursing homes or long-term care facility. So the basic question was to generate a framework first. And the second was to how do we understand in terms of a long-term care facility. So generate a framework where true guidelines could be implemented, and then see how long-term care facility can be implemented. So basically it was a very easy models. It has two locations, community and long-term care facility. And there were people who were moving back and forth. There were some family members whose relatives or family members were in the long-term care facility. So they were visiting the people, but there were other people in the community. They were not moving to the long-term care facility. So we call this population as a mobile population. The population, so this is the community. It has non-mobile population and mobile population, and they are visiting a long-term care facility here. And only fraction of the people goes back, the other remains in the community. So only people who have a family member in the long-term care facility actually visit, and the others do not. So how do you capture these movement on a daily basis in a model? So we took simple SIR models and contact behavior, where we have three types of population. We have non-mobile community, mobile people who are moving back and forth, and resident of long-term care facility. And these are LCO is the one we named it like LCO. So here the important things was we take into account the mixing probability, how they mix with it on a daily basis. One of the important aspects that was taken into account was a fraction of time they are spending on a daily basis, which is tau, in a long-term care facility, and 1 minus tau, which was omega, they were spending in the community. And so there is tau coming in these formula. These are mixing, how they mix with each other is coming in this, tau is coming and omega is coming. It's weighted by how much time the mixing is happening. So the influence, the non-linearity of influence was a function of the time that they spend in each of the locations. And so we use some conceptual views of building this mixing probabilities. And just to show you basic idea, there were three populations: the community on the top, SEIR, and then SEIR for the mobile individuals who are moving, And then for the residents in the ABCD is a residents SEIR model. So it's have basically SEIR type model for 3 different populations, right? The important thing here is this mixing that are happening for the mobile population, for example, is a function of these probabilities that I was showing you in the previous. How do they mix? And that is a function of waiting time, time spent in these. So these things are very tricky actually to capture it. And this is basically weighting these mixing patterns in it. And you can do some maths also in that. For example, reproduction number was very complex. It's a cubic root, and basically it becomes quickly very complex. And but truly speaking, it is capturing the essence of the long-term care facility and how the family member mix in it. So I have just few minutes, so I will kind of give a rough overview. What we did was using this model, we were trying to understand CDC planning scenarios. Basically, CD designed the planning scenarios for the community to understand, to control an outbreak, and so these planning talk about because they have seen in the real life some population have low virus transmissibilities, and some people in that are having less symptoms and they do not transmit before the symptoms. And so they designed this 5 different scenario of how you can plan it. However, this planning scenario is for the community and not for the long-term care facility. So what we did was we used this scenarios for a long-term care facilities, and we built in the previous model that I showed you there, and we draw some conclusions on it, and we were able to make some differences in the long-term care facility, what is going on in the long-term care facilities. So just to give you an essence of it, it matters how people mix. It matters drastically how people mix. And well, we were saying the mathematical model is unable to capture the outbreak. And the reason was that we were not taking account the heterogeneity in the mixing in our models. And I think this is very important aspects. And then we also talked about if it is heterogeneous environment, how is important, what strategies are critical in that. So I just want to give a brief outline about how long-term care facilities are truly captured here and how their impact of the CDC policies, Center for Disease Control policies, we are studying in that, for example. So this is an ongoing work right now, and hopefully soon we will have some results that could be publishable there. Now in April, Delta Airlines talked about, so now I'm talking about a different close contact places, and it's an airplanes are very good close contact places. They changed their boarding policies. Well, was it there a modeling done for it? Nobody knows, but they changed the modeling work. I doubt that they have done some modeling work there, but they changed the modeling from zone wise to now basically basically the from a zone wise to back to front boarding process. So the question was, is this a right policy or not? So then first of all, you have to have a platform where you can study something like that. So, well, just to let you know, there are very good filters in the airplanes. So, which can actually filter out almost 99% of the particles of a size 0.3 micron in size, or bigger than 0.3. And it has very rapid system of cleaning. So during the plane, you are less likely to get, during the flight, you are less likely to be infected. So when do you get infected? Most likely you get infected when you board a plane or you deplane them, you come out of the planes. And that is the time is very important. So we studied something like that. We studied this work. This is a joint work with some group in Dr. Ashok Srinivasan from University of West Florida, Matthew Scott from Arizona State, Srish Nemale from Embry-Riddle Nautical University, and Robert Pale from New York University. And we were studying the boarding policy. How do you evaluate that policies? Which one is the better ones? And so we use these models here, which was called as a pedestrian movement model. And basically, it takes into account the velocity of an individual moving and the force. You change when you walk in the let's say airport. You change your speed based on whether other person is right in front of you or not. So that force of action is always acting on your body while you are walking on it. So it takes into account the social force that we describe it, and it is defined by mass into momentum of an individual's, which take into account velocity and the other forces like an obstacles or people repulsions or your desire to speed up or slow down. This type of model that we used, and we also use the definition of the contacts, different contacts in that to study this thing. Again, it's an SIR model, but it is more at an individual levels where we are defining an average number of contacts per individual that are happening, which are changing over time, and then the fraction of susceptible in a small radius of an individual's. And how do you how many cases will be generated and by this. So anyway, so this is something that at an individual level, how do we model it? In fact, you can talk about reproduction number also using some kind of approximations here. And then basically you can derive a distribution of reproduction number as well. So anyway, so the whole, what I want with the time running out, in this study, the major goal was the policy that that Delta Airlines, for example, back to front was doing, which was this one, back to front, business first. This was a Delta Airlines new policy. Is it good or not good? So we take into account many scenarios. We take one zone like passenger board in a random order. No preferences given to the business, just like a Southwest Airlines. In US, and that does the random order. And 6 zone, for example, if there is zone, like business comes first, and then there are 6 zones by which the airlines was doing earlier, and then back to front with the row by row, and no preference is given to the business class, for example. And the last one was the Delta Airlines, which was business first, business class first, and the back to front. Means you start with the last row, and then the next row, and so on and so forth. So that's how people enter. Well, the question was, which one is creating the more infection, basically? So we use these models, and we kind of did 2 studies where we had a middle seat occupied and middle seat unoccupied. And we quantify the number of infection that could be generated or number of contacts that are happening. And well, we find the middle seat will go do a good job, but do some job, but not really a significant aspects of middle seat empty. But I think one of the major conclusion that we made is, well, you know, the Delta Airlines new boarding policy have a major flaw. They were doing this back to front business first policy just to save their time and money, but they were not thinking from the infection perspective. They did not do the modeling work. So we realized that this is very, very important, and their policy is flawed. They have to change this policy. It's better to do other zoning or other random process on the overhead overall. And well, with that, let me end here. And I'm sorry, there is a lot of disturbance here around. But I want to draw some audience for this new webinar series that we are been doing right now. And it will start in just few minutes right now. And please do participate if you would like to hear on the education and pedagogical practices in this COVID times, there's lots of problems, challenging practices that, different practices that we are doing right now, which is kind of, we are learning as we go from these experts. So with that, thank you for inviting me, and I hope it has given you some idea on how practical modeling that people have been doing and how data is being linked to it.
Thank you very much, and it was great. And we know that you have an activity in some more minutes. Yeah. We have only one question, and if we have more questions, okay, we are going to ask you after the meeting, yeah, and you can answer, sure, it. Okay. Sure. Thank, sure, you very much. But we have under one, okay, in this, okay, moment. Have you considered the variation of the epidemiological parameters sometime, piecewise, for example?
Well, what do you mean? Whosoever asked, is it meant to say piecewise defined function for contacts? Well, yes, we can do that. But the question is the pieces. How do you define the pieces of the piecewise defined function? There has to be some, and the data is not there in that pieces form. You have to design the model based on what data is there rather than what you know. So for example, if I am a dynamical system person, all the modeling exercise I use dynamical system, then it's like I have a hammer and I'm using the same hammer everywhere. But I think the real life problem should guide you what aspects you can use a piecewise defined function in some cases, but maybe not in all of them. And the data should guide you in that case.
Okay, thank you, and thank you again. Go, because you have a great job with this seminar. Okay, thank you very much, and say hello to everybody in ASU.
Definitely, I will. Take care.
Okay, bye. Bye. Thank you. Bien, vamos a continuar en unos minutos.